under fading skies. Tattered flags waving dreams in our eyes. The crowds roar like a storm on the wind. We're the underdogs fighting again.
What's going on, guys, and welcome to another edition of Stateside Footy. I am your host, Steve Silver, and of course, it is the pre-match build-up USMNT team versus Portugal, which goes down tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And tonight we are going to get in the starting 11s and we're going to get in what we should expect tomorrow night in Atlanta. And of course, this coming off the heels of I wouldn't necessarily an embarrassing loss. I mean, some of these things tend to happen, and especially for the United States men's national team, when you're going throughout the history of this national team in the lead up to World Cups, there's always a loss to a non-CONCACAF opponent. So for me, looking back at what this match was, I wouldn't say it's much to do about nothing. But that being said, it's not, out of the way surprising. Before we get into this one, please do me a favor and please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any upcoming Stateside Footy and content. Because after tomorrow's live stream, we are going to do an edition of Stock Up and Stock Down, and my final World Cup roster prediction show, my World Cup 2026 roster based on the trends of what we've seen, Mauricio Pochettino, and from that standpoint, yes, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of disappointment from the Euro snob section of the U.S. men's national team fan base. But that being said, as a student of this national team, I can tell you that there will be domestic-based players that are going to be on the World Cup roster, just from the standpoint that most goalkeepers, if not all of our goalkeeper pool, with the exception of Jonathan Klinsmann, apply their trade in Major League Soccer. So right off the cut, there's probably going to be 3. I would probably venture to say there's probably going to be 6, but you guys are going to have to tune in for that one. But all right, let's go ahead and get into it, because I do want to talk a little bit about the U.S. versus Belgium a couple days ago. And I have watched this match a few times back. I'm more convinced than anything that Mauricio Pochettino's game plan was to win this match within the first 45 minutes. And if you guys were paying attention to the pre-match build-up going into Belgium, I pretty much spit out, because really when you're talking about skill positions, Belgium night and day are better. when you're looking at both wing players, whether Doku or whether it's on the right-hand side. And I think they went with Salamakers, who plays for AC Milan, but they also have Nico Götze that they can throw in there. I mean, they have world-class wingers that are on that team. And granted, maybe the strikers, may or may not be as good as what they used to be, but they're still pretty goddamn dangerous. And of course, with depth, especially at the wing position, and also what they can do at the number 10 position, it was going to be a tall order. And so from that standpoint, the best way that the U.S. men's national team could counter that is to press them high and hard early, get them on the back foot, and take your shots early and put their keeper under duress, and you have no idea how you never know exactly what's going to happen. And sure enough, the U.S. men's national team actually had some very good opportunities to score goals. If this team would have went into the half up 2-0, it is a different mindset protecting a 2-goal lead versus what happened where they missed a few chances. They did score first, but they conceded as quickly as they scored. And all momentum was taken out of that match heading into the half, because now all of a sudden, instead of going in with a 1-0 lead or potentially going in with a 2-0 lead, all of a sudden now it's 1-1, and the next goal essentially is going to take command of this game. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened in the second half, as the U.S. were not able to get back into that game. And I know a lot of fans are going to sit here and say that it was because of Christian Roldan, it was because of Sebastian Berhalter or Max Arfsten, or some of these other MLS players. That's not the reason why we lost. Now, granted, it didn't help. Right, I'm the guy that's going to shoot right down Main Street with it, man. I don't have an agenda. Right, I'm going to call it like I see it. Right, Max Arfsten did not have a good game. Sebastian Berhalter made a mistake that directly led to a goal, and so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But what I will say was that Mauricio Pochettino is not an idiot, and he understood that the Belgian team, even though that this is not Belgium of 2014 or 2018, but it's still a pretty good UEFA. It's still a pretty good UEFA team. As a matter of fact, according to the ELO rankings, I believe they're sitting in number 19 right now. They're a top 20 team in the world. They're capable of doing damage, whether it's in the Euros or the World Cup. That is a national team that has world-class players on its side. So from that standpoint, when you're going to the type of games, you need every single advantage that you possibly can, and you have to avoid the feel-out period, that 15, 20, 30-minute feel-out period that genuinely happens with this team, and you literally just have to take it to them, because trust me when I tell you, there is a mental advantage of coming out of the break, protecting a 2-goal lead, because now, because at that point, you're essentially forcing your opponent to dare to attack you. If you're going to come into that second half, you can make tactical adjustments where maybe you bring another center back, and you're not going to be playing in a back four. And you're going, I hate to say this, you're probably going to be bunkering and countering. And so maybe something else, maybe it plays out a little bit different in that second half of the 2-goal lead. But from everything that I've seen watching that match in real time, but also a couple times back, Mauricio Pochettino wanted to win that game in the first half. And he damn near, and let's be perfectly honest, the United States, men's national team were the better team in that first half. They were dictating the pace of the game, and they were actually doing a fairly decent job against Jeremy Doku for a good 40 minutes of that first half. And by the way, notice why they kept going to Doku time and time again, because it was a mismatch versus Timmy Weah in that position, which is why they were always dropping Tanner Tessman down in giving Doku an extra defender, giving him that extra look so he couldn't necessarily be potent. But that being said, eventually those type of players are going to figure out a way to get something done. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened at the end of the first half. And so all of a sudden, all momentum gets taken out of that match. In that second half, I mean, Jesus Christ, 4 goals in that second half. And the United States essentially held us. But that being said, this is it shouldn't anybody that has watched this national team pre 2010 understands exactly where I'm coming from, because I've essentially seen every single World Cup cycle from 1990 on, and generally speaking, there are these type of losses in the run up to a World Cup. And for more than anything, these matches, yes, they are a rehearsal, but so especially for this team and the way that international football works now, this is a feeling out process for you to get your first look at exactly what you're going to be facing in the World Cup, because we don't travel anymore. This national team does not do a lot of road games. A lot of it has to do with TV and contract, all that other stuff, but also because of the Nations League now, whatever open availability is, it's played inside CONCACAF in the United States. And so this team doesn't have the opportunity to go travel to Belgium or go travel to Germany, the Netherlands, whatever the case may be. We're rarely going to see that anymore. So there's not that that built-in momentum that you can possibly you can actually point to in a mid-cycle where players can look at it and understand that they can hang with any team in the world, right? That was the difference pre-2010 versus as we get into the the 2010s and the 2020s, when television really kind of set the tone for international soccer, right? But that being said, to me, it wasn't that big of surprise, because when you're kind of looking at the way that Mauricio Pochettino set the team up, essentially you're going 4-3-3 versus 4-3-3, and without Chris Richards in that lineup, and when you're playing with a guy like Tim Ream in your back four, and it was 100% obvious that he has become a defensive liability. It was always going to be a struggle, even if they actually did go into the half up two. It was going to be a struggle to hold it unless they, unless they went to a back three and radically changed their tactics midway through. Yeah, it was always going to be difficult, but it possibly could have given them a little bit better of a chance. And again, these things tend to happen. And at the end of the day, these things are friendlies. And so I think that's important to remember as well, too. These aren't, World Cup warm-up matches, as we will see in late May, early June. So I'm not necessarily putting too much stock into it. But that being said, we are going to get a little bit into it, because I think there's a misconception when it comes to Major League Soccer players. And the funny thing is I knew it too. I knew we were going to see it, especially when it comes to USMNT Twitter. The only thing, and we see it with some big name, Twitter profiles as well too, that, of course we were going to see the anti-MLS agenda on full scale, especially when that final whistle blew. And I actually kind of found it actually quite funny, because that's not the reason why we lost. It didn't help any. I'll just say that it didn't help, but that's not the reason why we lost. So we'll get into that a little bit later today on the show. But all right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Before I start against Portugal, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that Poch did get in that Belgium match. And again, from the standpoint of from a tactical standpoint, and again, I understand that you're missing two center backs in that first game, but that being said, you still had enough cover with the center backs that were still available, with the fact that there was Joe Scully and Freeman available, and Austin Trusty was still available. So if you wanted to run a three, could have, and that would have pushed Jedi and Whale a little bit farther up the pitch. That would have actually given you better attacking prowess in order to actually pull off what he was trying to pull off. Now, the reason why he didn't do it, the reason why he wanted to sit back a little deeper, is because of the things that we were already talking about. The fact that Belgium, with their attacking prowess, the one thing you don't want to do is allow their speeds to beat you deep over the top or around the corner in the back. So I understand exactly why Poch did it. But that being said, I think there's evidence to see that playing, a traditional back four, even against a team like Belgium, it was probably never going to work. Here's the weird thing. I agreed with the back four, but that being said, I still didn't think that this team is set up, to execute out of the back four. And for the most part, I think that was due in fact that the skill players that we needed to show up in that match, Flo Balogun, Christian Pulisic, they just looked uncomfortable. Flo Balogun was a non-issue in that Belgium match, and that was actually kind of surprising considering the form he was in, and the fact that you would think that, especially against their two center back pairing, you would think that Flo Balogun would be in positions to actually be a little bit more dangerous, but we didn't see that. As a matter of fact, Belgium did a good job of taking away space, so we couldn't get behind. And Christian Pulisic was forced into a position where he had to play hero ball on more than one occasion. There just wasn't room for him to operate because, he's coming from, he's drifting in central areas from wide areas. And, from that standpoint, did a very good job of kind of taking away that center space. And so Christian, on more than one occasions, had no choice but to do what he feels like he has to do, which is make sure that the team is on his back and he does X. And unfortunately, it just didn't necessarily work out. Whereas if you're playing that, I guess you can say that 3-4-2-1 formation, Christian and Wes are going to be starting a little bit more in central areas where they're going to be able to make interior runs that are going to draw defenders to them, where their distribution is going to allow a guy like Flo Balogun to actually be a little more in one-on-one situations. It's going to allow a guy like Weston McKennie to also drift forward too, and be far more dangerous than he was when he was on the ball outside of, his set piece prowess. So from that standpoint, me personally, I just think that if you were trying to win that match in the first half, I didn't think Pochettino necessarily set us up for success in that manner. Now, I understand it seems kind of weird. I understand it, and I kind of agree with why he went with a back four. I just think that it potentially negated any of the positives of what he was trying to do. And sometimes you're going to have to roll the dice and take a gamble. And you're relying on your backline speed, right? So from that standpoint, for instance, like if you went with a back three of, let's just say that it was Austin Trusty, Mark McKenzie, and Alex Freeman, and then you have Jedi as your wing backs, you have that backline speed where you're going to be able to track back and be in positions, whether block a shot, close down space for potential shooters. And from that standpoint, you're not going to necessarily have to worry about it as much. But the fact that he played Tim Ream, now all of a sudden you kind of have to be a little bit more withdrawn. Your backline's going to have to play a little bit more deeper because of the liability of what Tim Ream is these days. And me personally, I just think he got it wrong. We had players available that if you did want to play in a back four, that would have been a little bit better of options than a guy like Tim Ream. And I'm not trying to shit on Tim Ream. It's just how much do we have to watch now to sit here and say that he's done right by the national team over the last couple of years. Yes, he was a late bloomer to the team, but that being said, whatever his high-end value was to the national team, it's no longer there. And the reason why he's there is because of center backs that we do have. Allegedly, he's the best with the foot on his ball, his ability to break lines, and his ability in the build-up. Fair enough. But that's not his primary job. His primary job is to defend. And he can't close down the way that he used to. He can't necessarily, his positioning is off. He's a step slow now. we saw it a lot in that second half where he just could not match up at all. Whether it's closing down space to try to block a shot, or being that back shoulder or cutting in to channel. So when a winger stops short and cuts in and takes those shots, well, there's Tim Ream right there to be that body to block. He just can't do that anymore. In that second half, what's funny is, in a lot of ways, yes, Max Arfson got burnt in the second half, but that last line of defense is Tim Ream. He's supposed to be the guy that's supposed to step up in that channel and be that, and be that guy to block shots. And he just simply can't do it anymore. And if there's anything that we took from that Belgium match, it should be that. And now that we're starting to hear that Chris Richards is going to be available for this one, and now all of a sudden there's just better options. There's just better options. And we don't necessarily have to put ourselves in that position where we're solely relying on a guy who's 40 years old and literally cannot play at this level anymore. The Tim Ream of the 2024 Copa America, he's not that same dude anymore. He's just simply not. Now, I do want to cover this one topic though. By the way, and I don't know if you guys knew this, but the Johnny Cardoso coming on off the half was set in stone prior to the beginning of the match, right? And I think that what we know now, and the reason why he got sent back to Madrid, is because of injury. And so from that standpoint, it was already predetermined prior to the match that he would only get 45. That's why Christian Roldan came on the field. At the half. And so from that standpoint, there you go. That's the reason why. And it wasn't because he played terrible. It wasn't because Christian Roldan's better. It was already predetermined, set in stone, that he was only going to get a 45 because of he may be dealing with a knock. Fair. And now that we know that that turned out to be true, obviously he got set back to Atletico, and so from that standpoint, I will say that Johnny was okay. That's the one of the things that I was a little disappointed was the fact that we didn't see another 20 more minutes on the pitch with Johnny instead of Christian, because I wanted to see how that would carry over into the second half, how specifically those two players would respond to that, giving up that goal late in the first half, how those guys would specifically respond, and then also what is their, what that chemistry would look like again going into that second half, and we just didn't get to see it. But I will say that, Christian Roldan was fine. I didn't think he was terrible. I didn't think he was great either. I thought he was somewhere in the middle. That being said, I will say that I still wonder whether or not he can compete at this level against these type of players, right? It's one thing against a rotated Japan, Australia, Ecuador, good national teams, not great national teams. And, he had some good matches in the fall, but again, just like Johnny, I didn't think his performance jumped out. And I thought Christian did some good things, but I also thought that the speed in which Belgium was playing, I thought it was a little bit too much for him. I didn't think the intensity was there. So there you go. Like I said, I will say that, when it comes to Portugal, when it comes to those two positions that I want to see Aiden Morris, Tanner Testament. As far as I'm concerned, those are the two best who should be playing, considering the opponent, and considering that not only the speed but also the technical ability of which Portugal can play, and the way that Portugal can absolutely light you on fire if you're not careful. You're going to need both of them. And make no mistake, man, Aiden Morris can play physical when he needs to. And I think that's what this match is going to call for. You're at box. That's what this match is going to call for. And when you look at what Portugal is putting on the wing, fires, and Aiden Morris certainly can do that. All right, so let's go ahead and look at starting lineups for this upcoming match against Portugal. This is my U.S. men's national team starting 11. So let's go ahead and bring this up. In just 1 second. In just a second. There we go. Come on, screen. There we go. There we go. So this is my starting 11 for the U.S. men's national team, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? We're going to be in the on the hunt for a win, and again, we're still kind of in that area where Pochettino needs a statement win before we get into the World Cup warmups. You would like to get that one out of the way. You would like that litmus, right? You want that momentum heading into those type of matches. And so from that standpoint, in that I have Matt Freese, and of course, I think we found out everything there is to know about Matt Turner. And again, there was a lot of speculation of why he was starting to begin with in the first place. And going into it, it made a lot of sense why Pochettino would give Turner a start, right? He's the incumbent starter, really, from World Cup 2022. And for the most part, you wanted to make sure that you didn't leave any stone unturned, right? You wanted to see exactly how Turner respond, considering he's essentially been a backup. And so I wanted to see exactly how he would respond in a big game. Conversely, the exact same thing with Matt Freese. You wanted to see how he would respond when he was dropped to the bench. But that being said, in a massive fixture, as we are going to get against Portugal, I think it's quite obvious that Matt Freese is probably the better of the two. There was a couple instances in that game, especially the first goal from outside, from 35 yards out. You would probably think Matt Freese probably stops that shot. One of the things that Freese does a little bit better than Matt Turner is his positioning on the line. He's just, from that standpoint, he just puts himself in better positions to block shots. And also against penalty kicks, he's just a little bit better. And so in this situation, you're kind of looking at it. And I know there's some fans that are calling for Chris Brady. I don't see Brady getting a start at all. And so from that standpoint, Matt Freese is back between the sticks. My back three, I've dropped Henry. I have Mark McKenzie playing off the left side. I have Alex Freeman off the right side of a back three, and I have Chris Richards playing in the central area, and he's also wearing my captain's hat for this one. In spite of no Tyler Adams, who was probably he has every single ear markings of what a captain should be. And so from this standpoint, if you need anybody to make sure that players stay calm, players stay focused, Chris Richards is going to be that guy. And that's my back three. I'm at this stage, considering Mark McKenzie does have that experience of playing on the left side for his club, it's not a position that he's uncomfortable with. And Alex Freeman's on this roster for a reason. And this team is going to have to. This team should be playing in a back three. I guess if you wanted to put Trusty on the left side and move McKenzie to the right, you could do that as well too. But this is the one that I came up with, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly how Freeman will be deployed in this one. My midfield four, obviously, I got Weah and Robinson higher up the pitch as wingbacks, and again, especially if the game plan is still the same as in Belgium, where you're trying to get this thing won in the first half. You're trying to go into the break up to. This is going to be your best opportunity, because one of the things that me personally, I think both of these two guys do is provide that. They also provide as well too, and it's going to allow Pulisic to be in a little bit better of areas where he can be far more dangerous. And again, I explained it. Having those two, both McKennie and Pulisic, inside playing a little bit centrally, and also being able to be in spaces where there's you don't have to create it. There's just going to be it, especially in counterattacking situations. It's going to allow Balogun to be in better positions to take shots. Same thing with McKennie. And so that standpoint, having guys like Robinson and Weah, especially with a guy like Weah who can run into the box, he can be a threat. Same thing with Robinson. Weah, essentially Weah's essentially back higher up the pitch, playing a right wing position. Essentially, from that standpoint, having essentially an inside forward, and with Robinson pinging balls into the box from the left-hand side, you're going to have at least two guys on the back post, and Pulisic and Balogun essentially trading at the far post. So what I will say is, this is the best possible formation this team could play. Obviously, I got McKennie and Pulisic playing underneath yet again. I know some are looking at Gio Reyna. I'd be fine if Gio got a start. It wouldn't hurt my feelings if Gio got on there. But that being said, I'd like to see Gio, if McKennie does start, I want to see Gio come on, essentially come on in the 60th minute. I do not want to wait till the 80th minute to see Gio Reyna. And especially if the game is close, we're talking within a goal. If you're going to make those switches, Gio is going to have to come on a lot sooner. And then, of course, up top, Balogun, because I actually want to see Balogun yet again. This is nothing against Ricardo Pepi. For me, it's just Balogun is number one. And again, continuity, chemistry, all of those things in between. Essentially, these 5 guys are going to have to get as much playing time as they can before the World Cup, 100%. We have 1987 in the chat, says Richard to play this match. According to everything that I've heard, he is back in training and he is going to be available. Now the question is do you play him? And I've always erred on. For me personally, I've always erred on. It's up to the player. If he's 100% healthy and he's ready to go and he wants to play, then you play him. Now you can have a minutes restriction, I guess, on him. If there's an agreement between Crystal Palace and the U.S. men's national team, I guess, I don't know. But that being said, I always delegate to the player, 100%. All right, let's take a look at Portugal, and we'll get that up in just a second. But yeah, to me, and especially when you're kind of this is what I think Portugal is going to throw at us, and when you just look at the absolute firepower in which they're going to be able to get forward, and the creativity and the flair in which they play. You're going to need some physicality in that middle of the park if you're the U.S., which is for me Tanner Tessman and Aiden Morris. Those two put out fires, but those guys have physicality in spades. And so, especially when you're kind of looking at this little and Bruno Fernandes, you're going to need two dudes that are, essentially sure that Bruno Fernandes and João Felix don't beat you, at least from outside the 18. But yeah, this is what I have. This is my Portugal starting 11, and of course, in the back is going to be Rui Silva. A back four of Mendes, Viega, Antonio Silva, and Mateus Nunes. João Neves. Conceição is going to be off the right. João Felix off the left. Bruno Fernandes underneath. And Ramos up top. And I got to be honest with you, this is a rock solid Portugal team. And you know what? I think they played to a 0-0 draw against Mexico. I think they played to a 0-0 draw against Mexico, and from that standpoint, and who knows exactly what that led, exactly why they couldn't score. I guess kudos to Mexico playing in Mexico, but the way that I look at this is that our defensive setup is going to have to be bulletproof in order to get this one done. And again, this has nothing to do with Major League Soccer players. This has nothing to do with, it has nothing to do with anything other than, if you are going to have the same game plan, you actually have to be able to have speed on that back line for counterattacking purposes, but also in case balls over the top. And again, Tim Ream cannot be in this lineup whatsoever. And I wouldn't, and by the way, and if he plays again, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's waving the white flag. It just lets you know that maybe there's just not enough trust in a guy like Austin Trusty, or maybe, maybe there just isn't that type of trust in a guy like Mark McKenzie, even though he got to start against Belgium. But that being said, it almost feels like that's the defensive security blanket, and especially the way that Poch likes to build out of the back. Having him on the pitch, obviously. Apparently he trusts Tim Ream, but again, you have to approach these matches like a World Cup match. And I know that seems kind of silly, but it's true. It seems kind of true. Like, I understand these are friendlies, and from that standpoint, it's hard for players to get out of that mindset, right? But we just saw the way that Mexico operated against Portugal, and they weren't treating it like a friendly. You get some of the other national teams across the globe and how they approach some of these games. The mindset in which they approach some of these friendlies, especially so goddamn close to the World Cup, and they're treating them like World Cup matches. That's because the mindset's correct. And again, it's funny because Carly Lloyd just put this out on Twitter. It's why does mindset and attitude are the first things that always get discussed when it comes to this national team? It's because, we have players that may or may not have the right mindset. I know it's tough to talk about, but it's true. Like, I get the impression that these players have that mentality when it comes to major tournaments. They'll flip the switch and they'll be awesome. But when it comes to meaningless friendlies that don't mean anything, they're show up and go through the motions. I hate to accuse players of that, and I'm not even necessarily accusing these players of it, but it does run through the back of my mind, if that makes sense. It really does. Because this national team was never that. It sure as hell wasn't as talented as some other footballing nations, but this national team never had an issue of toughness and mindset and fight. Like, that was, it's the fucking bare minimum. It's the fucking bare minimum. And it certainly doesn't help when you have a second half like they did against Belgium. It certainly does it. Big shout out to my guy, Nate 75. I love the fact that he is repping Rhode Island FC. He's repping hard, man. It's always good to see you, Nate. Hope you're doing well, man. But keys to victory. Again, it's pretty simple. If you get chances, finish them. Don't rush it. But that being said, I like the way that they came out against Belgium. And it was clear. It was decisive. It was aggressive. And they were putting themselves in very good positions to put the ball in net. I liked some of the chances they were taking. Unafraid to play that long ball down the right side to get Weah in good positions to get balls into the box, right? I like seeing that. They were being brave. They were taking chances. I want to see that again. I definitely want to see that again in a formation that definitely suits them a little bit better, because I actually think that there's a good chance that we actually might get that second goal this time around, potentially even a third. And if you're going into the half with a 2-goal lead, it's going to be easier for this team to bunker a little bit better in that second half. And, we're talking about a result instead of a loss. So keep that same mentality, man, because that up until that equalizer, that probably was one of the better first half we've seen under Mauricio Pochettino. It certainly wasn't as good as Uruguay or Paraguay. But that being said, it's a different level. It's a different caliber type of team, man. It's a different level of their national. The way that they approached that Belgian game was correct, especially when they kind of had Belgium pinned back a little bit. This time you're going to have to finish your chances. Like, on that, I think it was on their third corner. McKennie, Wes actually had a point blank shot right at net and didn't bury it. Now, granted, he scored on a later one, but that being said, imagine if he buries that shot early and grabs that second one, and all of a sudden it's a different vibe, man. We're still going into the half with a lead. So, that being said, it's like you're going to have to be able to take advantage of what Portugal is going to be giving you. And this team actually can be got, man. This is a good team. Make no mistake, it's a great team, but they can still be had. But it's going to take a lot of courage in order to do it. But most importantly, man, when you get your opportunities, you have to take them. And you have to be clinical when you do it as well too. And I still like to think that we have players that are incredibly clinical. I really do. I think Balogun and Pepe are clinical strikers. Obviously, Pulisic has been clinical throughout his career. Weston McKennie this season, of course, in the second half of the season, has been clinical Juventus. Allegedly, Gio Reyna can be clinical as well too. So from that standpoint, I don't think there's any excuses. We can be. We just haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen it consistently yet. All right. So before I get out of here, I want to talk about two things. Number one, I'm curious to know if anybody of you guys out there are worried about Christian Pulisic, or even slightly worried, because I've been consistent in saying that of all the players that you don't need to convince or you don't need to tell how important it is, it's Christian Pulisic, right? He's Captain America. He understands the attitude, and he understands that the entire weight of the country are going to be on his shoulders. And you would expect a dude like Christian is going to come good. That being said, his last goal for the national team was in late 2024. Didn't score at all in 2025, which actually it was kind of astounding to think of it. And then I had to go back and look at it. And the reality was that I think I'm trying to think, because he was there for the Nations League in March, wasn't in Gold Cup, and I'm trying to think if he was in September or he was in October. And so he didn't really have that many call-ups in 2025. So I guess that kind of makes sense. But that being said, it's for a guy who is supposed to be the heartbeat of the U.S. men's national team. It seemed like it was a little outstanding to me to think that he scored it all in 2025. But sure enough, that's true. And of course, when you look at his club situation currently, I think last weekend he got his first assist. I think that was his first goal contribution of 2026. And there's a lot that goes into it. 2020 in the back half of 2024, 2025, he was, dealing with knocks and, little knocks and injuries. And he rested up. He didn't go to Cup because he wanted to rest up. And, in the second half of the season, from January all the way to March, he's kind of been playing her. He's got a couple knocks. He's out for a little bit. But that being said, form-wise, it seems to me, just looking at him, it seems like he's struggling with form for a little bit. And I think that carried over to the national team. And I'm just curious to know if you guys are a little bit worried about it. Or do you think this is much to do about nothing? in the back of my mind, I think it's much to do about nothing because, again, you saw what he was in World Cup 2022. 4 years later, he's in his prime. He's clearly one of the best goal scorers in Serie A. And in the back of my mind, I just think that of any dude that's going to show up in the World Cup, it's going to be Christian. But I'm a little worried. I got to be honest with you. I'm a little worried. I would be remiss if I say that I didn't worry. I wasn't worried a little bit because in that type of match that we saw against Belgium, yes, there was I don't think the formation suited him, and I also think that the way that Belgium was keying in on him, he just didn't really have the space to create. And I think that, national teams that do their scouting reports understand that one of the better ways to beat the U.S. is to make sure that Christian's a non-factor. If you can body Christian a little bit, it's going to work out in your favor. And me personally, I think this is a lot. I think it resides on Pochettino to figure out a good formation where it's going to allow Christian some freedom, where he can do what he needs to do. Because if you don't, you're going to see what we saw against Belgium, which is Christian playing hero ball, where he's going to try to take on two defenders and put a shot on net, whether the shot's going to get blocked or, he's just going to miss the, their post by a country mile. When Christian's at his best is when he has space to create and he's enjoying the game. We can point to a handful of different, different examples over the course of the last 5 years where, when Christian's at his best for the national team, whether you like the coaches or not, they put him in a good position for him to be with the ball at his feet in space or in 1v1 situations where he can create space immediately. And, what we saw Pochettino to begin with through the first half of 2025, I just don't think that is conducive to, playing to Christian's strengths. And make no mistake that in order for this team to achieve what we think that it could possibly achieve, Christian's going to be the one that is going to have to do a bulk of the heavy lifting. And so I thought that Maurizio stumbled upon it in the fall when he made the tactical formation change. I think he kind of stumbled on something that, when we saw Christian play, it looked like it fit him and suited him quite well. So we'll see what happens tomorrow against Portugal, but I don't know. If you're a national team fan, there is a little concern about Christian. All right. Lastly, I wanted to talk tonight about some MLS notions, some misconceptions, because again, like clockwork, man, like clockwork. And I know what this is. But like clockwork, after getting bodied against Belgium in that second half, what was the first goddamn thing from USMNT Twitter? What was the first thing? Where did all the blame go to? That's right. And the MLS players that came on. Like clockwork. And it was not surprising. I actually had a feeling it was going to happen. We talk about this because, again, I want you guys to, if you look at my side profile, you see gray hair. I've been around I've seen this national team over the course of the last 4 decades. And the reason for Major League Soccer was to enhance the bottom line of the national team. It was designed as a pipeline to the national team. And so Major League Soccer was always going to be hand in hand with the national team. To have a domestic league develop players to either for 2 reasons: to get them over to Europe and get them in the national team. But it was also going to buoy the youth national team as well too, and we're certainly seeing that as well. But specifically for the Belgium match, this is the funny thing. Once Belgium equalized right before the half, all in them, the U.S. understood that they had their window to double their lead in the second half and put Belgium in a position where they had to fight back. The onus and the pressure was on them. And what Belgium ended up doing was reversing that, putting it on us. And it was instead of them being down by 2, then it's next, literally it was the next goal essentially wins. And they did that right away in the second half. And again, when Johnny Cardoso came off at half, that was planned. It was prearranged prior to the match. He was only going to play 45. And he brought on Christian Roldan. And I didn't think Roldan was terrible. I didn't think he was great either. I think he was his usual self. I think maybe the speed was a little too much for him because Belgium played quick, played very. But I thought in possession, especially building out of the back, I didn't think he was. I thought his passing was decent. But that being said, when Belgium is attacking through central areas of the pitch, I just didn't think he was. I don't know. To me, I just thought the game was a little too quick. But by the time we saw Maxton and Sebastian Berhalter, the game was already over. Momentum clearly on Belgium's side, and essentially what that was Pochettino fortunately waving the white flag. And you want to get some guys, you want to get some game time. And it didn't help. By the way, it didn't help that Max Arston got bodied by a backup right winger. Didn't help. Sebastian Berhalter couldn't clear it, and his mistake led to a goal. But I don't necessarily think it's an indictment. I just think it was an impossible situation for those players to come in and expect them just to stop the bleeding. I think it was too harsh of an assessment in that specific instance. The question really is if Christian Roldan, Sebastian Berhalter, and Alex Freeman, Max Arston, and Patrick Agyemang started the match, would we have been bodied in the exact same manner? And of course, the answer is no. But one of the things that bugs me, and again, I don't like to pick fights with other national team fans because number one, we're all fans of the same team. We have different opinions on how a World Cup. We have different opinions on how a World Cup roster should be built. But that being that being said, we all want the exact same thing, which is a World Cup trophy. That's why we're fans of this, because of the ultimate pride at the end of a World Cup. All right, let's get that out of the way. But what I will say is that there is a reason why most of our coaches have had World Cup rosters that had Major League Soccer players on them. And at one point in time, it was because we didn't necessarily have a lot of players playing in Europe. And then that changed, where we did have a lot of players playing in Europe, but coaches still went back specifically for MLS players. I wouldn't say specifically, but there's a reason for it. It's simple. It's really goddamn simple. Because a coach has a philosophy and has a tactical vision he thinks is best for the national team. And he's got a pool. And so his job is to look at an entire pool, and he's looking at specific skill sets that match exactly what he's looking for in specific positions. And the interesting thing about the Eurosnob half of the national team fan base is that if you're playing in Europe, that automatically makes you better and more qualified for the national team. That's the gist that I get. And the way that I look at this is, okay, but let's say that you have, like, here's a good example, right? Here's a good example. Gianluca Busio is absolutely having a hell of a season in Serie B. But he's not getting a lot of national team call-ups. He's probably worthy of it, but he's not. Yunus Musa is not getting called in. Why not? Is it because that he doesn't necessarily fit the profile of a box-to-box midfielder versus the guy who's in Major League Soccer who possibly does? Because maybe he might be a little bit more technically better. Now, maybe Musa or Gianluca Busio might be quicker, but could it be that a guy like Mauricio Pochettino is looking at it specifically by position and specifically looking at the technical abilities of what he requires to play that position? And so he's looking at a guy like Sebastian Berhalter and kind of looking at it like, okay, well, if all things are even, he kind of fits the profile a little bit better. Now, I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying there's a reason why certain coaches continue to pick Major League Soccer players, because they fit a little bit better than certain guys that are playing in Europe. And by the way, specifically Busio, he's playing in Serie B. Now, there are a thousand reasons why I don't like Major League Soccer. There's 1,000 reasons why. But that being said, I usually err on the side of the coaching staff, and I don't believe in a MLS conspiracy. I don't think there's an MLS quota. Me personally, I just think when I see some of these fans online, the first question that I always ask is, like, when you start watching this national, if it's like 2012 or like closer, it's like, okay, dude, I get it. Like, you started really watching international football like after 2018 World Cup. So you're looking at MLS. You're looking through MLS through a jaded eye, because you're seeing the same things that I'm seeing. The salary caps and the difference between attacking and and defending in Major League Soccer, and some of these other things that, by the way, I don't like about Major League Soccer either. And I actually do believe that, for instance, like if you ask me to take a championship striker over an MLS striker, right? For instance, like if you're going like, I'll just go like Patrick Agyemang versus like Jesus Ferreira or Brian White. Yeah, I'd probably take Agyemang, because I know that the championship is a little bit better. Because the DP rules, and because most Major League Soccer teams spend most of their money on attacking players, whether it's strikers, cams, or wingers, and because Major League Soccer teams don't invest heavily on the defensive side of the ball, there's a There's a wide discrepancy when it comes to, attacking and defenses in Major League Soccer. So if you're a striker in Major League Soccer, applying your trade in that league is probably not going to get you as ready for a World Cup as if you were playing overseas. Same thing with wingers. But, center mids, potentially defenders, and goalkeepers, I don't think it necessarily really matters. I don't necessarily think it necessarily matters. The only thing that matters is your positioning, your ability to pass, and your ability to break lines. And if you're a holding midfielder, can you put fire out? Can you defend? Can you defend those central areas above the 18-yard box? And if the answer is yes, then you're probably going to get a look. Same thing with defenders. My only issue with Max Arfton, he's not a defender. That's my only issue. He's more of a winger. Let's see. Tony Martinez, 3759, says our back line needs time to build cohesion and chemistry, work together as a unit. Unfortunately, with injuries and experimenting, it hasn't happened. I think Mauricio Pochettino has tried to do that, which is why you see a lot of Tim Ream and Chris Richards for the most part. But that being said, I think he's going to have to rethink that a little bit moving forward. Hopefully we see it. And again, I had a back three of McKenzie, Richards, and Freeman. But that being said, if you told me it was going to be Trusty, Richards, and McKenzie, I'd be okay with that, 100%. But yeah, that's the thing about Major League Soccer that I think it's kind of funny because a lot of people will point to that 2002 World Cup roster as being, or that 2002 U.S. squad, and saying that it was, if not the best, it was like the second best World Cup roster that we have ever assembled. And the funny thing about that squad was that we had Jeff Agus, DeMarcus Beasley, Landon Donovan, Kobe Jones, Carlos Lamosa, Pablo Mastroeni, Clint Mathis, Brian McBride, Tony Miola, Eddie Pope, Josh Wolf were all in Major League Soccer. And a lot of those guys played very, very big roles on that team. Berhalter was with Palace. Cherundolo was in the second Bundesliga. Friedel was in the Premier League. Hayduk was with the Bundesliga. Both Eddie Lewis and Casey Keller were in the Premier League. Same thing with Joe Max Moore. Johnny O was playing for Ajax. Claudio was with Sunderland. I think Ernie Stewart was with in the Eredivisie, and then Tony Sana was with Nuremberg. But a good portion of that 2002 team played in Major League Soccer, and in an era where we didn't have a lot of guys playing in Europe, and that was what I consider like the dark ages of Major League Soccer, a league that potentially was going to fold. But you look at Major League World Cup rosters after that, and you're going to see the same. You're going to see the same breakdown. And by the way, this was never an issue until 2000, 2001. That's kind of when I really started seeing this weird split in this whole theory and thought process of if you apply your trade in Major League Soccer, you should automatically be disqualified for the national team. It's like, dude, I am so glad you're not in charge of the national team, because you would be overlooking certain tangibles that soccer players have. And your ability within the constructs and the confines of the international game, where you probably have a skill set that makes you a little bit better. you know, there's different reasons these days why players stay in Major League Soccer. I'll admit that. And I'm not shilling for Major League Soccer. I don't get paid by Major League Soccer. I could care less. But the reality is, it's like, your national team isn't just a collection of every player that's playing a player trader, because some of those are absolutely not good. And in a lot of cases, Major League Soccer is playing on a better level. I can make the case that Major League Soccer is probably better than the better than the Danish league, the Belgian league, Italian second division, maybe even the Spanish second division. There's we have some guys that are in Europe, but they're just not playing in top leagues. And so from that standpoint, they kind of get lost in the they tend to get lost in the shuffle. Paxton was having what I considered a good year last year in the Eredivisie, on loan from Frankfurt, and couldn't get a call in. And it was a shame too. We did pretty well, but again, when you're looking at specific skill sets and you're looking at how this team was being ran, and you look at Paxton as being like a 10 who can play on the wing a little bit, but you had Malik Tillman, you had Christian, you had Gio, you had guys that hadn't buried in the depth chart. Of course, he wasn't going to look. That didn't stop people from thinking he should be on the being on the national team because he played in Europe. It's like, come on, man. Use some rational thinking. But anyway, that is my take with this. That is my take on this. And by the way, I just when I think of the World Cup roster, there are going to be players that our manager trusts. For whatever reason, there is that trust factor, and a lot of it has to do with the way that they train. When they get called in, they train, and they show up with the right attitude, and they're willing to play hard for the badge. That kind of endeared to Pochettino, who, by the way, was the exact same dude with Argentina. I also want you to keep that in mind as well too. But as it goes for tomorrow versus Portugal, as it pertains to Portugal, what I will close this one out tonight is that, again, if it is going to be the same objective, that we are trying to get this thing in the first 45, then we're still going to have to play with the exact same bravery that we showed against Belgium in that first 40 minutes, because I thought that was a very good 40 minutes, and we nearly pulled it off. But that being said, we're going to have to be able. Poch is going to have to show that exact same bravery when it comes to the tactical display, because playing in a back four with your back four a little deeper is not going to work. We're going to have to be able to push some center backs a little bit higher up when it comes to the possession, and we're going to have to be able do that with accordingly. And having a guy like Tim Weah and Jedi pushing up those wings higher up and playing balls in. But that being said, we're also going to have to be a little bit more courageous through the middle of the park. I like the idea of Tanner Tessman kind of being a little bit of that midfield facilitator too, especially if we're playing quick 1-2s from that center, from that center through, and opening up space and allowing a guy like Wes or allowing a guy like Christian to draw defenders, so we can get that overlap, or we can get that inside run. We're gonna be a little bit better off for it, and we're gonna be able to score some goals. So from that standpoint, man, that's the way I kind of look at it. And who knows, man? If we can actually execute, I can see a result. But that being said, we're going to have to execute, and we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to do it often. We're going to have to do it early, because if it's going to be the same type of situation where we concede as quickly as we score, there's a good chance that it's going to play the other way. And if we're in that situation where we concede 8 in 2 games and only 3, 4, we concede double what we score, there's going to be even more question marks heading into that roster announcement. And the one thing that this team cannot have so goddamn close to the World Cup is a toxic fan base. This is the time where our fan base needs to be 100% in unison, and we don't need to be talking about, Major League Soccer players or whatever the case may be. I think that is I think it is a detriment to the national team. Granted, it is what it is, man. Everybody's allowed to have their opinions, but being so close, man, we should be talking about the World Cup and not what went wrong, or poking holes in Pochettino's philosophy, man. I don't think it does any good. That being said, it's like the last thing I want is to see a fractured fan base heading into it, because you're going to have a lot of skeptics, man. A glass half empty type of fan base that is just assuming to get hurt, instead of kind of daring to dream a little bit. So that's going to do it for me, guys. I will be back tomorrow for US versus Portugal. The live stream will be right here on Stateside Footy. And I do want to thank Tony Mina, the great 1987 and 1875, for participating in the chat tonight. You guys are awesome. I want to thank everybody that's tuning in via YouTube and X tonight. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and also the notification bell as well too, because as soon as the live stream ends, we will be having our stock up and stock down show, and of course the final World Cup roster prediction show, as I lock in my final 26. And I'm also going to do a show too, as soon as the roster is announced, and of course I'll be doing a live stream for the roster announcement. But I'm going to do a show to see how right I am and how wrong I am. I'm kind of curious. I really kind of curious to see how close I'm going to get to it, because I'm going to be basing my decisions on what Pochettino thinks, and going off the trends of how he's called in his rosters, whether that be for Nations League or Gold Cup, or the September, October, November friendlies, whatever the case may be. I'm going off of trends, and so we'll see how right I am. So that I'm going to do that as well too. So I hope you guys are along for that one. So again, please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell. That's going to do it for me. You guys are awesome, man. And it's always fun to talk U.S. soccer with this national team. And yeah, man, I don't know. Words can't describe how much this national team means to me, and the how excited I get when it comes to World Cup time, man. So that's what I'm here for, man. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night, guys.
Rusted goalposts under fading